You can start the recording. Thank you. That's great. I would like to welcome everyone to IEBC's webinar, Providing Student Support Services in Extraordinary Times, a Caring Campus Approach. And today's webinar is focused on incorporating racial equity into Caring Campus. You know, at Caring Campus, we operate under the mantra, students come where they feel welcome and they stay where they feel cared about. And this webinar is about making sure that all students who come to your colleges feel this way. You know, there's really a tremendous amount of power in connecting with students. In fact, some of you may be familiar with, and I'll just raise it up here, a new book that just came out. It's called Relationship Rich Education by Peter Felton and Leo Lambert. And Jordan Horowitz and I were lucky enough to speak to the authors actually this morning for an hour and talk to them a bit about their work. But if you'll indulge me for just 1 second, I'd like to read a part of this book that talks about the importance of relationships. They state, decades of research demonstrate that peer-to-peer, student-faculty, and student-staff relationships are the foundations of learning, belonging, and achieving in college. These effects are especially strong for students of color and first-generation college students. So this book is absolutely wonderful, and it describes how relationships make a difference for both community college students and four-year institution students throughout the United States. And they provide several examples. In fact, their first example is one of our Caring Campus colleges in Illinois. So why don't we get started? I am very pleased to have a wonderful group of leaders presenting about their Caring Campus efforts and integrating racial equity. President Robert Vela is from San Antonio College. San Antonio College is part of the Alamo Community College District and is located in San Antonio, Texas. We also have our own Denise Wisenhut, who is Vice President of Student Services at San Diego City College. And she's going to be talking about the real care and the self-care that leaders have helped staff initiate at San Diego City College. My name's Brad Phillips, and we are fortunate to have our Chief Operating Officer, Jordan Horowitz, who's going to talk about specifics in terms of the behavioral commitments that most colleges are now engaging in with professional staff and how those commitments can be adjusted looking at the concepts of implicit bias, asset versus deficit-based thinking, and equity-mindedness. So with that, we'll move on. So just some housekeeping issues. First of all, we will be recording this session. And as you notice, we have closed captioning. So we hope that closed captioning is accurate and not saying too many things that are not accurate. But you will be muted throughout this webinar. And what we ask is that if you have questions, please enter into the chat and ask those questions. And what we'll be doing is we'll be summarizing the themes of the questions that you have. And so we, at the end of our conversation, will be able to respond to those questions. And we will also open it up at the end for folks to ask questions through chat as well. So why don't we get started? Today is a review of Caring Campus. For those of you that are unfamiliar with it, we'll talk a little bit about what Caring Campus is. And we're also going to describe some assumptions about colleges for both professional staff and students working and learning in a virtual environment. We're also going to have our experts talk about their perspectives on racial equity in terms of a Caring Campus lens. Jordan will talk about racial equity concepts and applying those concepts to our behavioral commitments. And then we'll also talk about some racial equity resources that IEBC has been producing. And with that, we'll open it up for questions and answers, and we'll take about an hour to do all of this. Now, first, IEBC's Caring Campus is grounded in research. Some of you may have read or been in school at the time that Vincent Tinto came out with Leaving College. That was out in 1993, and it describes some of the reasons why students leave college, and many of those reasons focused about that students feel a lack of connection to the institution, to an adult in authority who cares about them. And today's focus is on professional staff. Now, we work with faculty as well, but for today, we're focused on professional staff. Now, we also talk a little bit about leadership and the importance of leadership in setting the caring campus tone. And that leadership is not just senior leadership, but also department level support and staff as leaders implementing Caring Campus campus-wide. We also want to share with you that Caring Campus is not an initiative in and of itself. It actually supports and buttresses other student success initiatives, such as guided pathways. In fact, we have a number of colleges that are integrating their Caring Campus work into guided pathways. Essentially, what Caring Campus does is add the human component to guided pathways, AB 705, and other kinds of things. And in fact, we are supported today for our webinar from the California Community College Chancellor's Office, as well as the Ascendium Education Group. And their support is very much under the guided pathways framework. Now, Caring Campus also requires very low resource demands. What you'll learn is one of our commitments is around wearing name tags. And that is probably the largest resource commitment that there is. We do not ask you to buy a piece of software or have ongoing support. None of that comes out. In addition, Caring Campus employs a unique coaching facilitation model. It is not a one and done training. Rather, the work that we do brings staff together from student-facing departments, everything from admissions and records to grounds, to public safety, to financial aid, where folks learn about and select behavioral commitments that work for their institution in their culture. Now, currently, we are funded by the California Community College Chancellor's Office and the Ascendium Education Group, working with 57 colleges around the US. 38 of those colleges are in California, and coming spring, we'll be working with 7 additional colleges. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about assumptions during these COVID-19 times. So we hope that you agree that both staff and students are primarily working at home, that they're not going to the campus very often, and that while they're working at home, they have other obligations that may take them away from work during normal business hours. So it really isn't business as usual or expecting staff to work 8 to 5 and be totally dedicated during that time. Rather, there are things that happen that may take them away. And we hope that staff have contact with one another for support. We hope that they have contact with their supervisors on a regular basis, and that they have access to a computer and a telephone. But during these times, especially with children at home, they may have to share these resources, and it may be difficult to engage fully. They also have normal stressors and challenges during the shelter-in-place order that we're all experiencing. And I know that in the many Zoom calls that we do with all of our colleges, we've seen everything from rabbits crawling across a keyboard to people holding children who were crying. All sorts of things. That is just the reality of working at home. But we also know that staff are very dedicated, and they want to continue their work doing the best they can to adjust to the modifications in their work environment, even though it's a challenging environment. Now, we have come out at IEBC with 2 different guides. The first was focused on behavioral commitments in a COVID-19 environment. The second one was, how do we care for professional staff to make sure that they're able to provide care for students? And our third guide is around Caring Campus in extraordinary times with a focus on racial equity. And it's important to know that there are many good groups out there doing deep work on things like anti-racist training and so forth. Our work is different. We occupy a different space. So we occupy the tactical space where we are dealing with folks right now, and they are working with students on a day-to-day basis, and we are working to integrate improving racial equity in those interactions. And we believe, and the research is very clear on this, is that if you're going to change attitudes, it's important you start with behavior. It used to be believed that you have to have attitude change before you can have behavior change. But decades of research tell us it's actually mostly the opposite. That is, once behavior changes, we find that attitudes change, and in fact, culture changes. Now at IEBC, we're very serious about racial equity, social justice, and we have established a Racial Equity Advisory Council. That council is meeting about every 3 weeks, and they are advising us on how do we get better at IEBC in implementing Caring Campus through a racial equity lens. That committee is co-chaired by President Jamila Moore of Kenyatta College and former Chancellor Homero Suarez of the Grossmont Cuyamaca Community College District, and has members from all around the country. Now with that, I'd like to introduce Denise Wisenhut, Vice President of Student Services at San Diego City College. Denise, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about something that really matters on our campus, and that is developing a campus of caring individuals who support students in racial equity. My campus, next slide, please. The magic of City College really is its diversity. We're 52% Latino, 10% African American. We have a strong representation of white and Asian students. These students, in addition to our commitment to serving some of the most underserved students in our region, really is what makes our campus so incredibly unique. And with that, we as a leadership team take great responsibility to make sure that we are doing the best that we can to support our students. Under the leadership of Dr. Ricky Shabazz, who himself is very committed to developing a caring campus, we have developed a framework and supports working in partnership with Brad Phillips to support our students. Next slide, please. So before we talk about what we do, we have to have it written somewhere to support our student achievement. And there are various places throughout our campus in which that is evidenced. One is in our mission statement, and one is also in the values of the college. And so what I wanted to share with you in particular is the language that relates to inclusivity. Inclusivity has such a strong relationship to caring, to developing a campus of caring. And so if you look at our value statement, we talk about strengthening and supporting an inclusive and diverse environment for our students, and we take that very, very seriously with a commitment to social justice. We believe that we are the social justice campus in our region, and it is evidenced in our over 100-year commitment to serving some of the most underserved students in our community in downtown. Next slide, please. San Diego City College really is a caring campus. And when we worked on this initiative, we had key stakeholders around the table. It's important that when you have your stakeholders around the table, that they represent different voices, the voices of administrative leadership, the voices of our faculty, and also extremely important is our classified professionals. You know, that individualized connection that classified professionals make with our students is so incredibly important to student achievement. We often know, I've worked in other environments, sometimes feeling like the biggest problem and challenge was whether or not students could get a parking space. That's not the case at San Diego City College. You actually step in on some levels and support them like maybe a parent would do, like maybe a good uncle, sister, cousin would do, a good friend. And in order to do that, that's fortified in the work that we do to support our caring campus at City College. So our team of folks who came together really developed a series of commitments, and I've kind of have them stipulated below. One is to connect with students. And one way that we did that is to put on our name badges. Now, initially, I was not about name badges. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. But recognizing how important it is to students to see not just me and who I am and the diversity that I represent, but also my name really gave value, I think, to students understanding and developing some truth and some relationship from the point in which I initially met them. So that connection of students using name badges is something that from our President Shabazz on down, everyone has a name badge. We also have business cards. And we're also, we also connect with students, and we're very mindful of how we use our referrals. So in the past, we used to have this thing called the green referral form. And what we realized is that that language of referral from an equity lens really sounded punitive in nature. Like you were going to take the green form to go see the people in admissions like you had done something bad. And somehow that walk from between one department to another, students would often go other directions because no one wants to be referred to anything, because for many of our students, it connotes their experience in elementary school being referred to principals. So we changed that from the green referral form to the green resource form. And so language, we know, is so incredibly important when we think about how we support our students. And that is a really important learning piece as we talk about what we need to do to support student achievement at our college, is to be cognizant of the messages that utter from our mouth and also the messages that we hand to them in writing, because we're developing that relationship and that partnership for communities that have historically been disenfranchised and underrepresented in communities. Another important piece of support and is the support and reinforcement of all of our staff, and that's really done through self-care. After the horrible events that have happened this year, and you all know that the George Floyd incident, staff was really shaken. And one of the things that our campus did was work very closely with our key supports, our mental health support, to bring them on campus to have a series of conversations with staff to connect them, to let them know that we see them and the challenges that they're going through. And also because they have a certain level of responsibility to support communities that are going through the very same experiences. And how do they do that and support our students in their successes? So that's an important thing to think about. Another thing that we did is we really looked at our targeted interventions with key areas like DSPS and EOPS. In the state of California, DSPS for our disabled students and for EOPS students, this is often some of our lowest income students. And so we increased our individual contacts that we made with our students, which was a little bit harder during these times. One of the things that we did pre-COVID is that we decided to change, going to the bookstore experience for our categorical programs like DSPS into a boutique, into boutique evenings, special nights where we just invited them to come experience the bookstore, eat, and have a good time. So these kinds of efforts, these abilities to connect with students are really, really important. And another important piece of that is just really the accountability side. And that is the responsibility at all levels to look at what we do and make sure that we're doing the caring efforts that are necessary. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to talk about at City College is something that we're very proud of, which started first in the area of student services, but the other areas of our college have also embraced. And that is something that we call the ultimate student experience. And so we've had the ultimate student experience for several years, but we really had an opportunity to do some further thinking, working in regards to our Caring Campus efforts. So the ultimate student experience has 4 pillars. And one is engagement, one is the aesthetic experience, one is the values, and the 4th is data and inquiry. And these are critical elements that are necessary as you think about the experience of our students. And when we endeavored to call it the ultimate student experience, some folks were like, are you crazy? Why are you calling something the ultimate student experience? People are gonna talk about, like every experience, if it isn't the ultimate student experience, but we endeavored to be bold. We said, you know what? We're gonna call it the ultimate student experience. And with that, impliedly some level of ownership from all of us to think about our experience as being the ultimate student experience, so that students feel that way. The ultimate student experience is when people go into buildings, so students feel that we value our experience as the ultimate student experience and that we strive to be the ultimate student experience. Examples of our ultimate student experience is the work that we've done in engagement. and that's engagement with students as well as engagement with our staff. And there's been a lot of just really great work that's been done to support, the staff experience. Some of the things that we've done for students is that we re-looked at how we did our welcome week. And of course, during COVID, we really looked at how we were going to do work with our welcome week. And in addition to our welcome week, we also looked at the supports and programs that we provide for our affinity groups on campus. So for example, we have a group called City Women Rock who held it's interesting. COVID actually increased our attendance in many of our events. So we have something called City Women Rock, which is basically a support group for women. And, we had almost 100 students show up for the City Women Rock experience. And in that really gave students gave them exposure to some of the support programs and resources that are available on our campus. Another thing that we really put a lot of effort on our campus is our basic needs. We recognize, particularly now, that basic needs is not just for our students, but basic needs also is something that's very important for our staff. We were having hunger action days on our campus and we were having staff show up. So we had to do some intentional planning so that there were spaces and caring and understanding to provide resources for our staff to be able to eat during this difficult time, a time in which many of their family members were losing their jobs at the very same time. So we are intentional in making sure that we support staff. Our president just had his holiday party and it was amazing. It focused on, really people having fun, because that's an important component. We just hosted another holiday party, and it was called, instead of city, it was called Serencity. And the whole focus was muscle relaxation exercises. And almost 100 people in attendance who just wanted to learn how to journal, be reflective, and be supportive. Because as Brad said, folks have to take care of themselves before they can support others. So that's something that's really, huge on our campus. Another thing that we've done on our campus is something called the aesthetic experience. And that's the last thing I'm going to kind of talk about in respect of time. But the aesthetic experience was our focus on the spaces that we have on our campus from an equity lens. So we had a competition, all offices, in which they had to remodel their spaces from an equity lens. What are the messages that people are having when they go into the spaces? And we had a competition. It was judged by the college president and key people. And some of the spaces are literally transformed today. Do you have intentional spaces for kids, for when people bring kids? Do you have children's books in the admissions office? Water features in the DSPS office. Do you say welcome? Do you have images of people that look like our students? These are all important pieces. And as to values, again, that speaks to equity, and all the work that we do, of course, is centered around data and inquiry. And so many of the things that I've talked about today are begat at the research office that we have on our campus to help inform our decision-making. That's it.
Well, Vice President Wisenhut, as always, you are wonderful. And I want to thank you for the great work that San Diego City College is doing for its students, particularly around equity as it's integrated into Caring Campus. I'm just so impressed with how you've leveraged the Caring Campus work to make San Diego City such a caring place. And in fact, in our call earlier today, just to share with our audience, you are one of the few colleges where your retention rate was higher than face-to-face during this COVID time. And a lot of that, I'm sure, was what you're all doing and the outreach efforts that you made in order to connect with your students so that they don't feel alone, so that they do feel cared about, so that there's an adult in authority who is reaching out to them for the college and checking on their well-being. So I just want to thank you for all of the efforts that you've done. Now, unfortunately, Vice President Wisenhut has to leave in a little bit. So if you have any questions for her, if you put them in the chat and I can get them to her, and we will get them back to folks. So thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to President Robert Vela.
Thank you, Brad. It's such a pleasure to be with each of you this afternoon during these very, very challenging times. But I want to thank Brad and Jordan for the opportunity. I want to commend Dr. Wisenhunt for her amazing presentation and the great work that she's doing out there in San Diego. But for me, I am the president of San Antonio College. I've been president now for almost 7 years, been with the college district for more than 12 years as a dean of student services and vice president of student services and vice president of academic programs as well. So let me just start a little bit about our journey. Before we get there, let me just tell you a little bit about San Antonio College. Next slide, please. So we are a Hispanic serving institution with approximately 20,000 students in any one given semester. About 33% of our students are Pell eligible or recipients. 9% of our students are veterans. 80% of our students are enrolled part-time. 60% of those students are female. About 62% Latinx students, 24% white, 8% Black or African American, 3% Asian, and 3% other, which includes American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about our journey. We just started the journey, and our coach is Jordan with Caring Campus. And you know, it's been an amazing journey for us, but I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the foundational things that we've been doing to really, I think, put us in a great position to institutionalize the Caring Campus methodologies that are being presented. Because I believe that there has to be a strong framework. There needs to be a foundation ready to accept some of this change and some of this. Anytime you talk about cultural change or institutional change, there needs to be a foundation for a lot of this work. So one of the validating points for us, we, for the first time, became an Aspen Top 10 finalist. We are in the running for the $1 million prize in April and are so proud because we're large and we're urban. And we serve some of the most impoverished, some of the most socioeconomic segregated communities in the country, not just in the city. I want to share with you that was often used as an excuse for us not to achieve excellence at our college because we're large, because we're urban, because we have a difficult and oftentimes marginalized population to work with. That was an excuse for us not to achieve excellence. And we began to flip that model when I became president about 7 years ago to begin on a journey of excellence. And this journey of excellence was really, it was based on a premise that if students begin to see what excellence looks like, what excellence feels like, they will begin to demand it and want it for themselves and their families. So it was no longer this issue of, well, you're just going to the community college down the road where you settle. There is no settling at San Antonio College. San Antonio College has become a college of choice simply because students get the foundational preparation they need to either enter the workforce or transfer into some of the most top tier universities in the country. And one of the things that I began to do to lay the foundation to begin to fully implement Caring Campus was that there was a focus on an educator heart. And I want to talk a little bit about the educator heart because we are a 95-year-old institution, very traditional institution when I first took over as president, which means that the only voice that counted, that really superseded any voice, student voice or community voice, was the faculty voice. So we needed to change the narrative to say that all voices matter: faculty, students, staff, community, stakeholders, alumni, partners. We are all equals at the table when we begin talking about what's best for SAC and success. So I made it a practice just to interview every potential full-time hire at San Antonio College. So for me, the goal was to hire the best, the brightest and the best, to have the best credentials and the best experience to serve our students. But that was not enough. That was not the sole reason why folks were going to get the job. The reason I interview every single potential full-time applicant or full-time hire, from administrative assistant to faculty to a vice president at the college, was for me to determine whether they truly had an educator heart, and not just an educator heart in general, but an educator heart for our community, an educator heart for our backyard. And part of that is really challenging them to see if they fully understand our backyard and understand that our students are highly minoritized, are socioeconomically challenged, right? And those were the questions that I was going to have to ensure that that educator heart was front and center. Next slide, please. So this is the statement that we add to every job announcement: faculty, staff, administrator. This is front and center of every single announcement to ensure that we're attracting the best qualified applicants, but also professionals with this educator heart. San Antonio College is a Hispanic serving institution with a population I just mentioned, all the demographic population. We seek employees who have a strong desire to contribute to a climate of inclusivity, who have demonstrated experience in supporting and promoting student success with and for diverse populations, and who have the ability to communicate issues and concerns faced by racially minoritized students. That is on every single announcement to ensure that we are setting the tone, not just for a caring campus, but a campus that looks at things through this equity lens. It's very, very important for us as we start hiring professionals to work with our students. Next slide. So how do we create I call it a college caring campus, right? And we just went through the program with our coach, Jordan, who is here today, to help us through this process. And for us, there was an awakening to know that we have the structure in place to fully institutionalize the caring campus modalities throughout the college. So part of what the process created were behavioral commitments, right? That you heard Brad talk about. What are those behavioral commitments that are conducive to a caring campus, but through an equity lens, right? So we are in the process of developing standards of behavior that will be known and marketed throughout the entire college and community, so that every student, every employee of our college knows that when they step foot into SAC or any office, these are going to be the standards of excellence or the standards of behaviors that we're going to demonstrate and ensure that they hold us accountable to those behaviors. And we simply have been very successful in applying the 4DX, the 4 disciplines of execution methodology, to ensure that we have secured high metrics when it comes to graduation rates, retention rates, and productive grade rates, and those kinds of things. So we simply wanted to apply that same methodology to this journey because it's something that is very meaningful for us. We've seen it provide tremendous results for us over the years, and it's just very natural for us. So part of the methodology is that we've got to focus on a WIG, and a WIG is simply a wildly important goal. So our focus is to create a college caring campus. So that will be our goal. This is something that we're going to begin as soon as we get back from the holiday break. Based on those standards of behaviors, or those developed behavioral commitments, we are going to develop lead measures to determine on a daily basis whether we're winning or losing, to ensure that those behavioral commitments are being met on a daily basis, not at the end of the semester, not at the middle of the semester, but on a daily basis. And how do you maintain that? How do you know that that's happening? You have to keep a compelling scorecard per department. Is every single member of the team contributing to those lead measures that's going to help ultimately create a college caring campus. And part of creating a compelling scorecard is to create a cadence of accountability. And the reason why this works is because each member of that team, each member of that department holds themselves accountable for success to ensure that they're meeting those behavioral commitments and ultimately creating a college caring campus, right? So those lead measures, those scorecards are developed within each department. They create those for themselves. They determine the lead measures. They will determine their cadence of accountability. But the point here is that we have to focus on what we know works. And this highly relational methodology works for our students, especially students of color. So the more we can institutionalize it, the more it becomes a fabric of who we are. But you can't start sporadic. This department does it, this department doesn't. Every member of our department, of our college, needs to be pointing to the North Star. And that North Star represents that wildly important goal. That wildly important goal for San Antonio College will be to create a college caring campus. When you have every single one of those efforts, every single one of those scorecards, every one of those lead measures, all pointing towards your wildly important goal, you begin to transform a culture. You begin to develop habits that are conducive to creating a caring campus. And we've had great success over the years applying this to other metrics. But this is going to be our focus this next spring, to ensure that we create habits, not just behaviors, habits that are now ingrained in the fabric of who we are and how we provide customer service to our students and how we engage our students from the point of entry to the finish line when they graduate and cross the stage. And when you start doing this, you start seeing successes, you start seeing best practices that are organic from each of the departments. We celebrate. We will have a summit by which departments will talk about what they've done to contribute to this caring campus atmosphere at San Antonio College. And we will celebrate those accomplishments. We will track the metrics. We will ensure that we're moving the needle and creating a true caring campus for ourselves. So I just want to emphasize how important it is to celebrate those wins, celebrate those accomplishments, celebrate the efforts, even if those folks don't hit every one of their measures. It's the sense that every department, every person is moving towards, working towards succeeding at those measures that will lead to a fully institutionalized caring campus. Thank you.
Sorry, it looks like I've been muted. Oh, I don't know what's happening here. Let me see here.
We can hear you now.
You can hear me now. So what I said, and I'm so sorry that I was muted. I don't know what happened. I think my Logitech camera had a brain fart. President Vela, thank you for that presentation. It's so important that celebration occur because without it, it doesn't get memorialized. And in the community colleges, we tend to have kind of a check the box mentality. Okay, we did that, let's move on to the next thing. We did that, let's move on to the next thing. But it's really important that you stop and you say, okay, this was wonderful. We did a great job. Now let's talk about this. Let's enjoy this, because that celebration begets further performance. And that's evidenced by being in the top 10 of Aspen. So congratulations. And with that, Jordan, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you, President Vela. And if you wouldn't mind sticking around to the end for some questions, that would be very helpful to our participants. Jordan, please go ahead.
Thanks, Brad. And thank you also to our two speakers. I am the Caring Campus coach for San Antonio College, as President Vela noted. We have a wonderful cadre of coaches, but Brad and I each take a couple colleges out of each cohort to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening. I want to start, we're going to look at 3 racial equity concepts and caring campus behaviors in light of those concepts. The first concept is implicit bias, which refers to the development of attitudes, opinions, and/or stereotypes that affect our knowledge, understanding, behaviors, and decisions in an unconscious manner. These biases are formed over a lifetime and are the result of our experience and what we learn from the media, advertising, our families, and friends. A common example of implicit bias is microaggressions, which is defined as the everyday intentional or unintentional behaviors that communicate bias. The second concept is asset versus deficit-based thinking and actions. Deficit-based thinking leads us to look at students as needing to be fixed. Many students come to college feeling like imposters, which can be exacerbated by a deficit-based mindset on the part of leadership, faculty, and staff. Many students don't believe perhaps that they belong in college. An asset-based mindset begins with acknowledging that every student brings a rich set of experiences and culture to our institutions. Different is not less than. If we're serious about making improvements in racial equity, it's important to build on student assets and support student success. We often hear the phrase, it's very common these days in higher ed, that we have to meet our students where they are. Well, an asset-based mindset makes this real. And the third concept we're going to look at our behaviors in the light of is equity-mindedness. According to the Center for Urban Education, or CUE, at the University of Southern California, equity-mindedness refers to the perspective or mode of thinking exhibited by practitioners who call attention to inequities in student outcomes. These practitioners are willing to take personal and institutional responsibility for the success of their students and critically reassess their own practices. It also requires that practitioners are race conscious and aware of the social and historical context of exclusionary practices in American higher education. Equity-mindedness, therefore, is about owning the educator role and responsibilities to address the needs of each and every student. So now let's look at some of the behaviors that you've been hearing about in terms of behavioral commitments, excuse me, and how equity-mindedness can be applied. The first commitment we're going to look at is the 10-foot rule. This means that whenever a student's within 10 feet of a staff member, leader, faculty member, and seems to need assistance, don't wait for them to come to you and ask a question. Approach them. Well, next slide. Because many Black students, we experience this in retail settings as microaggression, it's important to consider how this behavioral commitment is conducted. And this was really brought to the fore by our coach working with Sacramento City College, who first brought this up as a concern. So what can be done to make this supportive and warm and not confrontational or suspicious? Well, first of all, positive psychology tells us to smile. A smile gives off a warm and welcoming message, and those who smile are perceived as non-threatening. Smiling also produces hormones in our own brain that makes us feel good. In addition to smiling, the question can be modified from, can I help you with something, to simply, how are you doing today, which opens up the conversation. Although the intent begins with the recognition that the student might need assistance, the question doesn't assume the same. Next. Our second commitment is to wear name tags. Name tags create an environment where those who can assist is explicit and obvious, which doesn't place the possibly embarrassing burden of figuring out whom to ask upon the student. It's important that students believe they can approach a staff member for any number of reasons, but students need to know who on campus can respond knowledgeably. And that's why name tags are so important. Name tags are an invitation to friendliness and a badge of experience. So next slide, please. So this has to do with avoiding a deficit-based approach, does not confirm the imposter syndrome for our students, and doesn't place the burden of knowing whom to ask upon them. Next slide, please. The third commitment is to give your information up front. And this is related especially to our current situation where students are encountering us in a virtual way. It's important for the professional staff member to introduce themselves first and then ask the students their name, rather than asking first for the student ID number. This is an important way of acknowledging the humanness of every student. It also ensures that we're pronouncing students' names properly, which is a sign of respect and equity-mindedness. When a student first comes into an office or approaches a cubicle or approaches a staff member or leader or faculty member, often there's no even need to ask the student for their ID number. Start with, hi, I'm Jordan Horowitz. I work here in financial aid, perhaps. What's your name? And you get their name. Say, how are you doing today? How are things going here at the college for you? Kind of relaxes the student, sets a tone of equality and balance. And then you could say, what brings you here today? Then if you need the student's ID number, you can look it up. Commitment next, please. Commitment 4 is warm referrals. Warm referrals means calling ahead so you can give the student a name in addition to the department where they need to go. And it also ensures that there's someone on the other end who's expecting the student. It also allows you to put the student concerns into community college and post-secondary lingo so that it's easy for the person at the receiving end to know what the student needs, and the student doesn't have to repeat and stumble perhaps over what they're looking for. In a virtual situation, take a cue from our medical colleagues. Ask the student for their information first in case you get disconnected. How we make referrals and to which staff can reflect our implicit biases and deficit assumptions about certain groups of students. Next, please. First week greetings. During the first week of classes, we usually set up information tables. It's important to meet students where they are. Take those tables out to the parking lot. Students should not have to get to the center of the campus before they find a table or some folks who will welcome them and can answer their questions or direct them to the proper resources. Next, please. It's important to go where students congregate. Also, staff need to get out from behind the table and greet all students. We cannot let our implicit biases influence which students we speak with. It's also important to reach out to all students in high-risk groups, especially in virtual times, making sure they know, not just during the first week, but when course drop dates are approaching, when it's time to register to obtain their degrees. The whole point is to reduce the burden on the student and ensure that they feel welcomed and cared for at our colleges. Next. And now I'll turn it back to Brad to talk about some of our resources.
I hope you can hear me. It looks like my microphone's working now. If you go to our website, iebcnow.org, we will have 2 different guides available now, and we're just finalizing the 3rd guide that summarizes and talks about what we talked about today. So we invite you to download these resources and share them with your colleagues. They're all available in PDF documents. So we hope that you get good use out of these resources. We have some colleges across the country doing entire calling campaigns based on some of the resources in the guides. And it's really making, as I said earlier with Vice President Wisenhut's college, a huge difference on retention. All because an adult in authority reached out to that student. In fact, at one college at Victor Valley, every staff member that made a phone call out had at least one student in tears. And not because the student was struggling and feeling isolated, but rather they were so pleased that someone at the college, an adult in authority, reached out to them to check on their welfare. This is our contact information. It's available on our slides that we'll be distributing. And again, we are recording the session. It is closed caption. It'll be available in the next few days, but you can reach myself or Jordan or Janet Knoll, who's our project coordinator for this work, if you have any questions about Caring Campus, our work around racial equity, and anything else regarding Caring Campus. And with that, what I'd like to do is open it up now to questions, and feel free to type your question into the chat if you don't mind. And I will start one off to President Vela just to get us started. And President Vela, you are so passionate about ensuring that every administrator, every professional staff member, every faculty member is approaching things with an equity heart. What happens when they don't? How is that dealt with? How are you encouraging, supporting staff, faculty, administrators to embrace this work and engage with students?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brad. And I think that the approach we have taken is that we're human beings and we make mistakes. We don't know everything as educators, and it's important to give ourselves some grace and give ourselves some space that this is initially going to be a little messy. We're going to misstep, but part of the journey is racial healing and the other things that we're doing around giving ourselves space to make mistakes that aren't intentional. It's just it's an issue of being unaware or uninformed or maybe needing more professional development around certain areas. So we have to create that space so that we don't get so overly confrontational about these things that we end up further polarizing people that have good intentions, that have good educator hearts. But they make a mistake, they make a misstep, and it's important that we create a culture by which we can embrace and use it as an opportunity to learn and to teach and to express what was happening in that particular instance. And oftentimes what we find, Brad, is that it was a simple mistake. There was no intention behind what they were doing. They simply did not have the wherewithal to understand the ripple effect that would have on a student or on a situation, right? But the moment they have that awareness and they truly have that educator heart, they come back around and understand that they're gonna have to change a little bit about how they do maybe some of the things they do. And now it becomes, you've got a champion now with you. Now we're all working towards the same goal, the same mission of the college.
You know, Robert, thank you for that. One of the things that, we hear when we do facilitations around the country, all sorts of stories of what happens on the opposite end. And at one particular facilitation I happened to be fortunate to be doing, one of the staff members told a story of in working at another college. They were with a colleague. It was the first day of class. There was a student of color and they interviewed her later, but she came up to these two staff members and said, looking at her schedule, said, "Could you help me find?" And one of the staff members said, "You need to learn how to read your schedule better." Now, this was at a four-year institution. At the four-year period, the graduation ceremony took place. She is walking the dais and she sees the staff member that said that to her, and she points her finger at him like this, and she says, "You almost ruined me." And we think about these messages that we give to students, especially when we think of our professional staff. They are the very first phone call that a student makes. They are the very first contact when a student comes on campus. How professional staff through Caring Campus greet students in a warm, welcoming manner makes all the difference in the world. And conversely, we have stories of many professional staff. We've done a kind of a short survey. About 70% of professional staff actually went to the college and live in the community growing up. And it's just fascinating how much they care deeply about that institution. So thank you for that. We have a number of other questions that came up, and I'm looking at Ruth Marie's, and it says, how would you apply the name badge concept while we are working virtually? Let me start with that one and then turn it over to President Vela and Jordan. We work with a number of campuses that ask this question. One of the things they do is they will often have a t-shirt working virtually that has the name of the college on that t-shirt, as well as a big name badge. Also, they're very clear in terms of, as you can see on our Zoom, it has Brad C. Phillips, IEBC. It lists their name, and in their case, it may be the department that they're working in. And so it's really critical that there is some way to apply that name badge for the virtual environment. President Vela or Jordan, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that the question really also applies to most. I think few students are going to call the college using Zoom, and they're going to be on the phone. And I think that this applies also to an earlier question by Chin Pham about greeting students virtually. I think the real point here is to start with who you are. This is the key to that, both of those behavioral commitments, is make sure that you greet the student with who you are, what department or division you are in. Always ask, how are things going for you? So that, especially now, because students are struggling, it gives them a chance to kind of pull themselves together. It establishes a human-to-human connection, which moves from a transactional interaction to a relational interaction. And that's really the key. I think in terms of both of these questions and commitments, is making sure that the student sees you, or sees, even though it's on the phone, understands you as a human being on the other end of this phone conversation or text or email. Even if it's an email to you, you can start with, hi, just want to let you know, this is Jordan Horowitz. I'm with this department, and that's why I'm answering your question. I hope you're doing well. Here is an answer to you. And if this doesn't answer your question, please don't hesitate to get back to me. My goal is to ensure your question is answered. So those are some ways to ensure, whether it's email, text, phone, that the student understands there's a real person on the other end of this. I think a lot of students have experience with chatbots on websites, and I know I have been very frustrated when it becomes obvious that these are pre-programmed responses to keywords. So I think anything you can do to let the student know there's a real person there it goes a long way towards fulfilling these behavioral commitments.
Our colleagues are so creative. You simply just need to set the framework, and it's just what Jordan said. We get fixated, especially in these times, very stressful times, around processes, right? And ensuring that every student need is met. The piece that we often overlook, though, is the relational piece. We get focused on transaction and ensuring that the transaction is there, that the process is there. But we don't take time to spend time with our teams to talk about, okay, every process needs to be relational in nature. How are we going to operationalize this and make it relational? Those are the conversations that need to happen by creating behavioral commitments. If you make those commitments and you start expecting those from your staff, because you've operationalized that process, right? And you've humanized that process, it becomes eventually, over time, a habit. It's not something that just you have to think about anymore. It becomes a habit for you.
Thank you, President Vela. We need to wrap up. It's 2 p.m. now. I just want to say, Margie Castellanos, I'm going to send your question over to Denise Wisenhut. And her question is about ensuring that staff spaces were equity inclusive. We also have an anonymous attendee that said how much energy should be invested. Faculty staff who simply do not prioritize diversity and inclusion. Just quickly, this goes to Brad's 1585 rule. So my issue is 15% of faculty, staff, administrators will jump on these concepts right away. They will need little help and they will be as equity inclusive as possible. 80% are, well, I need a little more information. I'm not unwilling to do it. I need some help. But if you give me that help, I'm going to do it. 5% are, heck no, won't go. My view is ignore them. And if 95% of the administration, the faculty, the staff is engaging in this work, then you have a truly magical place.
I would agree. Don't put your energy into helping that 80% and not dragging that 5% kicking and screaming into something that they don't want to do.
So with that, I want to thank President Vela and of course, Vice President Wisenhut and our own Chief Operating Officer, Jordan Horowitz, for their time today. This will be available in the next few days. And I mostly want to thank all of you for attending this webinar. And please feel free once it's completed to share with colleagues, and no problem getting in touch with us. Please do so. I know there's a holiday break, but we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a safe, happy holiday season. Take care.